What if intelligence wasn't measured by how much you speak, but by how wisely you choose your silence? Think about it. Some of the smartest men in history weren't the ones shouting the loudest or trying to prove their knowledge. They were the ones who understood the hidden power of restraint. Because sometimes, what you don't say speaks volumes more than 1,000 clever words ever could. Welcome to Stoic Havenway. I'm truly glad you're here, because today's message might shift not only how you see yourself, but how the world sees you. Here's the truth: intelligent men aren't flawless, but they've learned, often the hard way, that certain phrases do more harm than good. They've come to understand that real wisdom isn't about having every answer. It's about knowing when to stay quiet, when to listen, and when to hold back words that could damage their presence, reputation, or inner clarity. Over the years, I've immersed myself in ancient Stoic teachings, and in modern life, quietly observing human nature, sometimes with nothing more than a cup of coffee and a curious mind. What I've noticed is striking. The wisest men I've met all have something in common. They don't speak just to fill silence. They don't try to impress with every thought. And they never say things that chip away at their own credibility. So today we're diving deep into 7 things a truly intelligent man never says. Not because he's perfect, but because he's wise enough to avoid verbal traps that undermine his strength. Stick around. Hit that subscribe button. Let's grow sharper, deeper, and more aware, together. Number 1. I already know that. It's a phrase that slips out so easily, isn't it? I already know that. It sounds confident, even capable. But beneath the surface, it often reveals something far less admirable: a closed mind. An intelligent man knows true learning never ends. And the moment you believe there's nothing more to gain, you've slammed the door on growth. I remember learning this lesson firsthand. Years ago, I was working with a mentor, a man whose quiet presence spoke volumes. We were reviewing a process I had done countless times before. As he began explaining something, I interrupted. "Yeah, I know that already." He didn't argue. He simply paused, looked at me, calm but firm, and moved on. That night it hit me. I hadn't just interrupted him. I had robbed myself of a chance to see things through his eyes, through decades of hard-won experience that no manual or training video could ever teach. Because here's what that phrase really says: I have nothing left to learn. That's not intelligence, that's ego, dressed in the costume of competence. Stoic philosophy calls that illusion out boldly. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything." Ego convinces us that we're standing on solid ground when we're actually wobbling on pride. True intelligence? It recognizes that knowledge isn't a trophy to collect and display. It's a flowing river, ever-changing, ever-renewing. Step in the same place twice, and the water will never be the same. I once watched a seasoned carpenter listen patiently as a young apprentice explained a basic technique. He nodded. He asked questions. He even thanked the kid afterward. Curious, I asked him later why he didn't just say, "I've known that for years." He smiled and said, "Because sometimes you learn more from seeing how others see." That, my friend, is quiet wisdom. So the next time you feel the urge to say, "Yeah, I've heard this before," pause, breathe, listen anyway. You might catch a new angle, a missing detail, a subtle shift in meaning. And even if you don't, you'll be practicing something far more valuable: humility. You'll show respect. You'll become someone worth listening to. In Stoicism, we call this mastery of the self, the ability to let go of pride in favor of clarity. To remain a student of life, always. And that is the kind of intelligence that never fades. We ended the last part talking about humility, the kind of quiet intelligence that grows from being a lifelong student. Now let's look at another powerful lesson wise men learn early. What we choose to believe about what's possible shapes everything. Several years ago, I worked closely with a man named Robert. At first glance, he had it all together. Sharp, seasoned, the kind of leader who carried the weight of the entire company on his back and somehow never seemed to break a sweat. People admired him, trusted his judgment. And yet beneath all that composure was one phrase that kept echoing through the halls like a silent curse. Number 2, that's impossible. It wasn't just something he said now and then. It became almost automatic. His default response to anything unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Whenever someone proposed a bold new direction for the company, a suggestion to modernize outdated systems, or even the idea of taking on a challenging client, his answer would come swiftly. That's impossible. At first, I'll admit, it sounded reasonable, responsible even. After all, who wants to waste time chasing unrealistic dreams? But over time, something began to shift in the room whenever he spoke those words. Not the idea, but the energy. It became clear that the phrase wasn't really about the situation. It was about him. Every time Robert said, "That's impossible," he wasn't commenting on the task. He was revealing his limits, his fears, his doubt, his reluctance to try, because failure might follow. And here's where the Stoics understood something powerful. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." That's exactly what was happening with Robert. He wasn't evaluating the challenge with clarity. He was projecting his own inner fears onto it. Fear of being wrong, of being seen as weak, of putting in the effort and still coming up short. It's a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't shout or tremble. Instead, it hides behind words that sound like logic. It's too risky. It's not the right time. It's just not realistic. But really, it's fear, dressed up as practicality, and it's one of the most dangerous masks a man can wear. Stoic wisdom offers a piercing reminder. The obstacle isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. I saw this truth unfold in my own life. Years after working with Robert, I joined a team facing a daunting project. The budget was tight, the deadline was unrealistic, and the team? Young, inexperienced, green. Every logical instinct in my body wanted to echo Robert's old line, "This is impossible." But I paused, and instead I asked myself a better question. What can I control today? What's the next small, meaningful step I can take right now? We didn't perform miracles, but step by step we moved forward. And that project? That turned out to be one of the most successful I've ever been a part of. Not because the odds were in our favor, but because we refused to freeze in the face of challenge. That's the difference. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And that truth became our anchor. When a man says that's impossible, he's not assessing the world. He's drawing a line around his own strength. But wise men, they see a different way. They understand that what feels impossible is usually just unfamiliar. It's not a wall. It's an invitation to grow. True strength isn't about winning every fight. It's about showing up again and again, especially when the outcome is uncertain. That's not naive optimism, that's disciplined courage. And it's one of the most powerful ideas in Stoic philosophy. Life will ask difficult things of us. That's a given. But the moment we label something impossible, we silently close the door. Not on the problem, but on ourselves. Yet the man who takes just one small step forward, while others stand still, he begins to open doors no one else even notices. And that's not just intelligence, that's wisdom forged in the fire of effort. Number 3, that's not my fault. Previously, we talked about the courage to move forward, even when the odds seem stacked. Now, we explore something even more subtle but just as powerful, the ability to take responsibility, especially when it's tempting to point fingers elsewhere. A friend of mine, Michael, once lost a major client. It was a big account, one that had taken months to build. When the news came down, his first instinct was to defend himself. The client was unreasonable. The market's been unstable. My team didn't deliver on time. And you know what? Each of those things had some truth to them. But while Michael was busy laying out all the reasons why it wasn't his fault, something more important slipped through the cracks. He missed the lesson. Instead of reflecting on what he could have done differently, he stayed locked in a pattern, repeating the same choices, making the same assumptions, and, inevitably, facing the same results. He believed the problem always lived somewhere else. What he didn't realize was that by refusing to claim even a small piece of responsibility, he gave away his greatest power, the power to change his outcome. The Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that we must focus on what's within our control and let go of the rest. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters." So when you say, "That's not my fault," you're doing more than avoiding blame. You're placing your ability to grow into someone else's hands. You wait for others to fix the problem, to apologize, to improve. But what if, instead, you looked inward, even just a little? Because the moment you accept responsibility, however small, you reclaim control. You shift from passive to active, from waiting to leading. In my own journey, I've faced this lesson more than once. There were moments when things didn't go as planned, projects that failed, partnerships that fell apart, results that missed the mark. And sure, there were outside factors at play, but every single time I stopped and asked, what was my part in this? I found something valuable. Maybe I hadn't communicated clearly enough. Maybe I'd failed to prepare. Maybe I didn't set boundaries or expectations up front. Even when others made bigger mistakes, taking ownership of my piece gave me something priceless: clarity, integrity, and the respect of those around me. Because here's the truth: blame is easy. Responsibility, that's where real strength lives. When you own your choices, you become the kind of man others trust, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to grow. The Stoics didn't teach us to run from hardship. They taught us to rise through it, and rising begins with a single question: what can I do differently next time? That's how intelligent men lead, not by tearing others down, but by choosing a better way forward, starting with themselves. Nuba. For I don't need any help. Let's talk about another phrase that sounds strong on the surface, but secretly weakens us from within. I don't need any help. It's a sentence we've been conditioned to admire, especially in cultures that glorify the lone wolf, the self-made man, the quiet warrior who carries everything on his back without complaint. But what if that image is a lie? What if the refusal to ask for help isn't strength at all? What if it's pride, cleverly disguised? Pride that isolates, pride that wears you down quietly like water against stone. Pride that convinces you that struggling in silence is noble, when in reality, it's slowly breaking you apart. This truth hit me like a thunderclap when I read about Abraham Lincoln during the darkest days of the Civil War. We often picture him as a solitary giant, stoic, grave, carrying the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders. And yes, he was strong. But here's what history often forgets. Lincoln didn't carry that burden alone. He surrounded himself with people who challenged him, advisors who disagreed with him, voices that questioned his decisions, pushed back and forced him to sharpen his thinking. He didn't lean away from conflict, he leaned into it. He wasn't insecure about not having all the answers. He was wise enough to know no man ever truly does. One famous example. During the brutal conflict at Antietam, Lincoln visited General McClellan, a man with whom he had sharp disagreements. And yet, he listened. He sought strategic input, because for Lincoln, leadership wasn't about pride, it was about outcomes. This was not weakness. This was humility, powered by clarity, and the same is true for us. The Stoics spoke often of mutual aid, of community, of cooperation. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, openly acknowledged his teachers, mentors, and friends in his writings. He didn't pretend to be self-made. He honored the support that shaped him. So why do we believe that asking for help means we've failed? That belief is the trap. It's what keeps us locked inside our own heads, drowning quietly in problems we were never meant to face alone. The truth is, asking for help doesn't diminish strength. It defines it. Because it takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes strength to admit, I can't do this alone. And it takes wisdom to reach out a hand, or to accept one. That is the kind of man the world needs more of. In the last section, we explored how even great leaders, like Abraham Lincoln, didn't walk alone. And the truth becomes even clearer. As we look deeper, intelligent men understand that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's wisdom wrapped in humility. Lincoln didn't just have a team. He had a cabinet of equals, often referred to as the team of rivals. These were men who disagreed with him, challenged him, and frequently clashed with his views. And yet, he valued their voices. Why? Because Lincoln understood something many never do. True strength is measured not by how much you can control, but by how much you're willing to learn. He spent countless hours in conversation with these advisors, not because he lacked confidence in his decisions, but because he understood the danger of living inside an echo chamber. He knew that having his ideas tested made them stronger. He didn't fear disagreement. He welcomed it. That kind of leadership doesn't come from pride. It comes from humility, and that's the powerful shift intelligent men go through. They realize that while self-reliance is admirable, it was never meant to be absolute. The Stoics made this point abundantly clear. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man of his time, didn't pretend to have all the answers. In fact, he wrote openly in his personal reflections, meditations, about the many people who shaped him. His mentors, his teachers, his friends, each one left a mark. And Marcus, in all his power and wisdom, took the time to acknowledge them. If the Emperor of Rome could express gratitude for those who helped him, why do so many of us resist asking for help? Why do we convince ourselves that needing support is failure? That belief is the real trap. It keeps us locked inside our own heads, quietly suffocating under pressure. We tell ourselves, I've got this, I can handle it, I don't need anyone. But what we don't realize is that in pushing everyone away, we deny them the opportunity to support us, and we rob ourselves of the connection we crave most. We cut off the very mutual support that holds people together. We try to carry burdens never meant to be carried alone. And yes, I've been there. There was a time in my life when I thought being strong meant holding everything in. Work, family, expectations, pressure. I believed that if I shared the weight, I'd seem weak, that opening up meant losing control, so I kept it all inside, and slowly it began to wear me down. Not in some dramatic breakdown, but in subtle, exhausting ways. Lack of energy. Foggy. Thinking. A growing sense of isolation. The turning point came quietly. One day I opened up to someone I trusted. I didn't make a grand confession. I simply said, I don't think I can do this alone anymore. And what I received in return wasn't shame or judgment. It was understanding, support, a listening ear, and a helping hand. That simple act of honesty gave me a renewed sense of clarity and strength I hadn't felt in years. That's when I truly understood. Real strength isn't about how long you can stand alone. It's about knowing when to reach out and when to receive. The Stoics knew this too. They taught that we are part of a greater whole. That cooperation is part of our nature. That mutual aid isn't just practical, it's essential. Epictetus once reminded us, no man is an island. When we pretend otherwise, we're not being strong, we're resisting the natural order of life. And here's the truth you must never forget. Asking for help doesn't make you less strong. It reveals the depth of your strength, because it takes courage to say, I need support. It takes honesty to say, I'm not okay. And it takes wisdom to recognize that carrying burdens alone isn't noble. It's unnecessary. So the next time you catch yourself saying, I've got this, I don't need anyone, pause, ask yourself, is that strength talking, or is it pride in disguise? And when in doubt, remember Lincoln, a man of immeasurable strength who led through humility and understood, better than most, that even the strongest among us need others to stand tall. Number 5. I'm too old for that. Let's now turn to another phrase, one that sounds harmless, but slowly eats away at potential. I'm too old for that. On the surface, it sounds practical. Sometimes it's said with a smile wrapped in self-deprecating humor. But beneath those 5 simple words lies something much heavier. It's not just a phrase. It's a resignation. A subtle, quiet surrender to the belief that your best days are behind you, that your time has passed, that the chapters worth living have already been written, and yet intelligent men see this mindset for what it really is, not just limiting, but toxic. Why? Because it chips away at purpose, slowly, almost invisibly. It convinces you to close doors long before they truly need to be closed. But let me tell you about someone who defied that belief completely. His name was Harry Bernstein. At the age of 93, after a long life working as a magazine editor and raising a family, Harry decided to do something bold, something many would say was too late. He sat down and began writing his first book. He called it The Invisible Wall, a deeply personal memoir about growing up in a small English town, divided by prejudice, religion, and hardship. His story was powerful, but publishers didn't see the value at first. The manuscript was rejected again and again, but Harry didn't quit. He believed he had something to say, something to create, and he refused to let age tell him otherwise. Finally, at the age of 96, his book was published. Not only was it released, it went on to receive international acclaim. It was translated into multiple languages. It touched lives across the world, and he didn't stop there. Harry went on to write 3 more books after that. In his late 90s, what struck me most about Harry's story wasn't the success. It was the courage. The courage to believe that life still had more to offer. The courage to believe that he still had more to give. He didn't let age define him. He didn't listen to the voice that whispered, "You've missed your chance," and that kind of courage, it's not exclusive to men like Harry. It's a choice we all face, sometimes daily. When we hear that inner voice say, "It's too late," do we shrink back, or do we step forward anyway? The Stoics had a clear answer. They taught that age means nothing to the soul. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on this truth in his meditations, reminding himself that while death is inevitable, our duty is to live fully and virtuously for as long as we are here. Wisdom doesn't come from simply getting older. It comes from staying curious, staying courageous, staying willing to grow until the very end. Growth doesn't stop with age. It ripens. I've seen it firsthand. I've watched men in their 60s and 70s learn entirely new trades, launch businesses, become mentors to the younger generation. They didn't see age as a reason to stop. They saw it as fuel to begin. I've also seen others, good men, let time and regret weigh them down. They listened to that whisper that said, "You're done." And they began to retreat from life, not because they had to, but because they believed they were supposed to. And the difference between those men, it wasn't circumstance. It was mindset. Because a man who says, "I'm too old for that," has already closed the door, but the man who asks, "What can I do now?" he opens it wide again. Here's the truth. Age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly. In fact, it gives us more to offer. Experience, perspective, clarity, resilience. These aren't signs of someone who's finished. They are the tools of someone just getting started. And that is the Stoic path: to keep learning, to keep striving, to keep showing up until the very last moment, because as long as you have breath, you have purpose, and as long as you have purpose, there is still work to be done. So if this message resonates with you, if something in you stirred while reading this, give this video a like and consider subscribing, because every time I discover a new way to see life, I want you to be the first to hear it. Number 6. I'll do it later. Now let's explore another seemingly harmless phrase, one that quietly steals our future. I'll do it later. In the previous part, we explored how the belief "I'm too old for that" slowly erodes our purpose. But age isn't the only illusion that robs us of life. There's another phrase, quieter, more seductive, that might be even more dangerous. It sounds innocent, almost responsible. "I'll do it later." We all say it, we all believe it, sometimes without thinking. "I'll call them tomorrow." "I'll fix things next week." "I'll start that dream project." How when life calms down, it feels like we're being logical. We tell ourselves we're not saying no, just not now. But here's the brutal truth. Later is where most of our intentions go to die. Let me tell you a story. A man I know, let's call him Thomas, was the definition of success on paper. He had a thriving business, a beautiful family, respect in his community, but he was also always busy, too busy. He kept telling himself he'd spend more time with his aging father later, when work slowed down, when the stress passed, when it was more convenient. So he postponed the fishing trip they'd talked about. He delayed making a call. He kept pushing back visits, assuming there'd always be another weekend, another season, another chance. And then, one day, later, ran out. His father passed away suddenly without warning, and Thomas was left holding a phone full of unsent messages and a heart full of words he never spoke. Years later, he shared this with me, not to seek sympathy, but as a warning. "We think we have time," he said, "until we don't." The Stoics were brutally clear about this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every single day of his mortality. Not to be grim, but to stay awake, to sharpen his sense of urgency. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's not just philosophy. It's practice. It's a mindset that wise men adopt, because they understand one truth. The clock isn't in our hands. Time doesn't wait. It doesn't care about your plans, your intentions, or your excuses. What you delay today, you may never get the chance to finish tomorrow. That's why the wisest among us don't wait. They don't stall. They don't hope for the perfect moment. They pick up the phone, they send the message, they take that first uncomfortable step toward reconciliation. They start the project that's been collecting dust in the corner of their mind, not because it's easy, but because they know that waiting for perfection is a dangerous gamble, and I've felt this in my own life. There were conversations I delayed because I didn't want discomfort, letters I left unwritten because I assumed I had more time. But when I finally acted, When I stopped waiting and stepped into the moment, something shifted. The weight of regret lifted. Clarity replaced hesitation. And I finally understood something. Action, not intention, is what builds a life worth remembering. The Stoics teach us to live now, to be fully awake to this moment, not some imagined future because later is a lie. A soothing illusion we tell ourselves until it's too late. A man who acts today, who finishes what matters while it still matters, he lives without regret. That's wisdom, that's freedom. Because opportunity doesn't knock twice. It slips away quietly, while we're busy waiting for a better time. Number 7. That's just how I am. And now we come to the 7th phrase, perhaps the most limiting of them all. That's just how I am. It sounds final, like a period at the end of a sentence, but in truth, it's more like a cage, a belief that locks us into patterns we no longer need but don't dare to change. This phrase isn't just limiting. It's a quiet surrender. It says, I'm not going to grow. I won't do the hard work of becoming better. This is who I've always been, and who I'll always be. But intelligent men avoid this mindset because they understand something most people ignore. We are not fixed. We are not frozen in time, defined forever by our past habits or mistakes. Who we are is shaped by what we choose to do over and over again. I've seen this excuse play out more times than I can count. One man loses his temper repeatedly, and when challenged, he shrugs and says, well, that's just how I am. Another avoids real connection, avoids vulnerability, and justifies it by saying, I've always been like this. But these aren't facts. They're excuses. Excuses that protect us from the uncomfortable work of transformation. Excuses that let fear and inertia wear the mask of authenticity. But deep down, these words reveal something else entirely. Resistance. Resistance to discomfort. Resistance to growth. Resistance to the truth that no man is finished becoming who he's meant to be. The Stoics didn't let this resistance go unchecked. They taught boldly that we are not prisoners of our temperament or our past or our impulses. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Likewise, it's not your nature that holds you back. It's the story you keep telling yourself about who you are. And yes, change is uncomfortable. It demands honesty. It asks hard questions. Am I acting this way because it's truly me, or because it's easier than doing the work to change?" But growth, real deep character-shaping growth, requires self-examination. It requires letting go of old narratives that no longer serve you. Intelligent men know this. They choose the harder path because they respect themselves enough not to stay the same, because in the end, that's just how I am isn't a statement of identity. It's an excuse for stagnation. And the Stoics remind us, life is change, nature is change. To resist it is to deny the very essence of what it means to be alive. But the man who embraces it, he becomes a work in progress, unfinished, yes, but willing, and in that willingness lies the beginning of wisdom. In the last part, we talked about the quiet courage it takes to embrace change, to stop hiding behind old patterns and start becoming who you're truly meant to be. But that journey, it begins with one brave choice, the willingness to let go of the familiar, even when that familiarity has become a source of pain. The Stoics believed that self-mastery is the highest calling, not because it's easy, far from it, but because it's necessary if we want to live a life that means something. Growth demands honesty. It forces us to ask hard, uncomfortable questions. Am I acting this way because it's truly who I am, or because it's easier than doing the work to change? That's not a question for the faint of heart. But intelligent men, the truly wise, don't avoid it. They choose the harder path, not because they hate who they are now, but because they respect themselves too much to stay the same. They understand that wisdom isn't a medal to be earned and displayed. It's a daily practice, a quiet, consistent commitment to becoming better, not for the world, not for applause, but for the man they see in the mirror each morning. In the end, saying that's just how I am is nothing more than locking the door on possibility. But the Stoics remind us that life is change. Nature is change. To resist that truth is to resist being fully alive. The man who embraces this doesn't fear change. He welcomes it. He knows that he will never be finished. And that's not a flaw. That's the point. Because in his willingness to keep growing, in his decision to stay, unfinished but open, lies the beginning of true wisdom. If you've ever found yourself saying one of these 7 phrases, trust me, you're not alone. I've said them too. I've lived through the consequences. I've learned, sometimes painfully, that intelligence isn't about never making mistakes. It's about not repeating them. It's about seeing your patterns, owning them and choosing to rise above them. And that's what we're doing here, together. Not aiming for perfection, but progress. One thoughtful, intentional, courageous choice at a time. So let me ask you, which one hit home for you today? Maybe it's time to leave. That's just how I am in the past. Maybe it's finally time to retire. I'll do it later. Before. Later becomes never. Whatever it is, this is your invitation to take the next step. Because wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always, always moving forward. If today's message lit a spark inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with a friend who's walking the same path. Someone who might just need this reminder today. Drop a comment below. Let me know which part spoke to you the most. I read everyone. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, Stoic Havenway. This is more than a place to learn. It's a community to grow, to reflect, to rise, and to return to the wisdom that brings us home to ourselves. See you in the next video. Until then, stay grounded, stay aware, and keep walking the Stoic path.